Hello, welcome back to another Python video in which we will learn functions, conditional statements, f-strings, and much more. And we will do all this by creating a grading system for the students. So if the students get marks above 90 or above 90, they will get a grade of A. If the marks are in between 80 and 90, they will get B, and so on. All right. But the main thing here is that we are going to do this we will use type hints within our program. So for those who don't know what type hint is, actually, we discussed in the previous video, the introduction video, that Python is a dynamic language, which means that data types are assigned to the variables on the runtime, which is fairly easy, but sometimes it can cause to have some issues. So we need to have some way which can basically catch bugs or errors before even we run the program. So for that, we need something called type hint. Let me show you what I mean. First of all, let's create a file. Let's call it students grade.py. Let's just write a simple print statement. So print I will actually define a variable first. Let's say marks equals to 98. But I'm going to need to give it a data type. Let's say int, because 98 is an integer. So we need to declare an integer. So it means that this value is only going to be an integer. Also, the type checking is off. That's why we didn't see any error. So I will turn it on. And actually, I'm using an extension for type checking. You have two main extensions you need to install. One of them is MyPy. And you can see here, type checking for Python using MyPy. So this will basically catch bugs before runtime. The other one is error lens. This one by Alexander. And it says it improves highlighting of errors, warnings, and other language diagnostics. So it basically throws you error on the same line if you make any error. I'm talking about error lens. So let me just show that to you. If I write string, you can clearly see it says expression of the type literal 98 is incompatible with declared type string, because that's not a string, right? We know that 98 is not a string, it's an integer. So it will throw you an error at the same time, not when you run the program. So that's the advantage of using type hints. There are several other purposes. One of them is documentation. So they improve code readability by providing clear expectations about what types of values a function will return. The second one is static analysis. So these type checkers like MyPy, it can analyze your code to catch potential errors before runtime. And that's what I said. And also specifically when you are trying to perform operations on incompatible types. The third one is collaboration. And it's important if you're working in large code bases. So in larger code bases or teams, type hints help other developers understand how to use functions correctly without needing to read through all the implementation details. So from now on, we will be using type hints in all of our Python programs, because it will potentially save a lot of bugs and essentially a lot of time. That's all about the type hints. Let's now create the actual program that we all came here for, which is calculating a grade calculator. So here we are going to have two main functions. One function will calculate the grade based on the conditional statements, based on your marks. The second function will be a main function which will actually drive the main logic. So let's try to create it. So first of all, def calculate grade. This is called declaration of the function. A function is basically a piece of code that does a specific job. So this function will calculate the grade, and it is specified by the name itself. It is pretty evident. So it will calculate the grade. We write it like this. We write def, which is a keyword, and then we write the name of the function, and then followed by the parentheses, which will get an input when we call the function. So when we call the function, we enter an argument, which basically comes here as a placeholder, and then we can use that value. So we expect marks from here, right? We will take the input from the user, we will take marks from the user, and then it will come here as marks. And what will be its type? It's going to be int, because marks should be an integer. And then we say it will return a string. Now, in normal Python, you don't do this, right? You don't write these types, because Python is a dynamic programming language, and that's what I already discussed. We are doing this because of using the type hint. All right. Let's first understand what this function will do. Let me write multi-line comments. Okay, so calculates the grade based on the given marks. Arguments will be marks is integer, and which is gonna be the total marks obtained by the student. So that's the argument that it will take. It will take the total marks obtained by the student, and it will return. So a function returns some value. A function can return a value, or it cannot return a value. But this function is going to return some string that we described here as well. And that string will be the grade. So either A or B or D, whatever, based on the marks. So it will return the string, the grade corresponding to the given marks. All right, so this is what this function will do. So we clearly described what this function will do. All right, so if marks are greater or equal to 90, the AI Copilot is basically returning me all the code, but we're going to write it line by line so that you understand everything. Return A. Elif marks greater or equal to 80, it's going to return B. So we say if marks, the marks that a student has inputted, we are going to take those marks from the main function, because the main function is the one that is actually driving the logic of this program. All right. So this is simple if-else conditional. So we say that if marks are greater than 90, return me an A. Else if marks are greater than or equal to 80, return me a B. Okay, so I just wrote all of the necessary grades that a student can take. And you can see here that the error that was being shown here is now gone, because I've already described that it should return me a string, but I haven't written or returned anything from this function. So as soon as I returned something, that error has now been gone. And in normal Python, without type hinting, you won't see these errors. So it makes you sure to be consistent with the types. All right, so that's our def calculate grade function. Now let's create another function, which is going to be the main function, which will drive the actual logic. And essentially this will return nothing. So we say none. So as I said, a function can return something or it cannot return anything. So in this case, we are returning nothing from this function, but it will execute the actual logic of the function, and we're going to see it here. Let me create a comment. Main function to execute the grading system. I'm writing this comment so that it's easier for you to actually get the logic on what we're doing here. So even if you read the code only, you will get what it is doing. So the very first thing is that get user input for students' marks. Now remember, this is a comment, right? A comment is something that is ignored by the interpreter. So it will not get run when we run the program. And this is a multi-line string. So if you have like a multi-line comment, so if you have a comment which is more than one line, then you can use multi-line comments. And this one is used for a single line comment. You can either put a hashtag, or you can use you can move the cursor on the line, and you can use Control / to uncomment. And if you want to make it a comment again, you can press the same keys, Control and /. That's how you make something comment. Okay, here we're going to declare a variable called students marks, and it's going to be an integer. So we're going to define it as integer. And we're going to take input. That's how we get the value from the user in Python. We will say enter the student's marks, and we will also mention from 0 to 100, so that the user does not enter anything other than 0 and 100. Now this is getting us an error, which is pretty interesting. And it says expression of type string is incompatible with declared type integers. String is incompatible with integer. Why? Because input basically returns a string by default. And we have declared here that it should be an integer. So that's why it's saying that it is incompatible with the declared type integer. We don't need a string here, we need an integer. So what we're going to do is we're going to convert this input into an integer. So we have a function. We're going to wrap this input into an int. Now you can see there's no error because now this will return us an integer. We have converted the default type string to an integer. All right, I hope that's clear. Let's now move ahead. Now we need to validate the input. We need to see if that's actually in between 0 and 100. So that's what I mean by the validate input. So if student marks is less than 0 or student marks is greater than 100, then we are going to print something to the console. We'll say, please enter valid marks between 0 and 100. All right. And we will return it as it is. So it will make sure that the user is basically entering the marks in between 0 and 100. All right. Then we got to calculate the grade here. So grade, which is going to be a string. And we're going to call here calculate grade function. And we will pass an argument, which is student marks. So now let's understand it here. We get the student marks from here, and then we pass it into this function as an argument. So let's say we type in 90. So 90 will be passed here as an argument in this function. So remember, we declared the function here. We write the logic for this function here. And then we actually, when you want to run the function, you need to call it. You need to invoke it. So here we are invoking it. And we're passing here a value of 90. Or it could be anything, which will be stored in the student marks variable. And then we stored in a variable called grade. So we basically store the value that we get from here into the grade. So it's either going to be A or B or C or whatever based on the marks. I hope that is pretty clear. So when we pass the value here, let's say 90, it will basically run the function like this. 90 will come here. Now it will check against the 90. So if 90 is, now let's actually replace the value here, which is 90. If 90 is greater or equal to 90, return A. So 90 is not greater than 90, but it is equal to 90. So which means this condition is true. So it will return us A. If there was a 75, then 75 is greater than or equal to 90, which is wrong. It will not return A. It will go to the another line, elif marks greater than or equal to 80, which is still not true. Then it will go here, elif marks is greater or equal to 70. So yes, 75 is greater than 70, and it will return a C. And that's how it will work. Now we need a few more things to end this, actually. We're going to display the result, right? We have done everything, but we haven't displayed the result. So we need to display the result in order for the user to see it. Display the result. And here we are going to use something called f strings. So you can actually print if you have some static data, you can just write it here. Your grades are this, whatever that value is. But if you have an expression and you want to execute that expression inside a print statement, because your marks are going to be dynamic, right? It's not going to be static. Sometimes it could be 70, sometimes it would be 90, 95, or whatever. So you cannot print this same line for everything because marks would be dynamic, right? So we need to write an expression here. So f string, which are basically formatted string literals, it's a way to embed expressions inside string literals in Python using curly braces. They provide an easy and readable way to format strings dynamically. And I can show that to you here. We write it like this. So we write an F, and then we use the quotes. So students marks student marks. So this will be printed as it is, and it will basically, this value will come from the variable itself that a user inputs. And then we're going to print another statement, which is the grade. So grade, like we also want to see the grade, and we also want to see the marks. So we're going to display the both. And the last thing here is pretty important, and many of the people don't, especially the beginners, don't understand it. And the way to run a function here is to, okay, let me write the comment first. Run the main function. So we say if name __ equals to main, then call the main function. Because the main function is actually the one that is driving all the logic. So we need to run the main function, right? We need to call it. We haven't called it anywhere, right? So we need to call it here. And let's now understand this statement. If name equals to main. This is quite confusing, especially for the beginners. So this code snippet, if __name __ equals to __main __ main. It's a way to check if the Python script is being run as the main program or if it is being imported as a module. So in Python, we have a concept called modules. So you can have many modules. This is just a single one. If you're basically importing something from another module, then it will return us false, and this main function will not run. So first of all, we say if, which is a conditional statement. This is the beginning of the conditional block. The code inside the block will only execute if the condition is true, which means if this is true, then only will the main function get called. If not, then it will not run. Now, the name function, the name variable, because you haven't seen something like that, right? We wrote grade, student marks, and yeah, these are the variables. So you haven't seen something like that. __name __. So this is a built-in variable in Python that represents the name of the current module. So the one that we are working on, right? And it is automatically set by Python. So we don't have to do anything with that. It is set automatically by Python. Then you have the equality operator. It checks if the value on the left side is equal to the value on the right side. Then you have this string called main. And this is a special string value that represents the main program. When a Python script is run directly, its name variable is set automatically to main. All right, I hope that makes sense. And then if that is true, then we call the main function. This is a function call. It assumes that there is a function named main defined elsewhere in the code, which is here, and then run it. So if the code block is true, if this code block is true, the main function will get called. Otherwise, it will not get called. Let's now run it. It asks for enter the student marks. We will enter 83. When I press enter, it gives me the student's marks and the grade is B. Right? So both of these print statements are getting run here. And that's where I said the marks should be dynamic, the grade should be dynamic. That's why we use F strings, right? So that we can run an expression as well.